Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. Today I'm going to talk about a recent Criterion release, a box set called the Ranown Westerns, and I purchased this in the recent Barnes & Noble half-price sale. 5 westerns directed by Bud Bedecker, all 5 starring Randolph Scott. The Ranown comes from Randolph Scott's first name, and the producer, Harry Joe Brown, his last name. And these are westerns. There's actually 7 of the Ranown westerns, which are considered the Ranown westerns. A little murky. There's some other films that could be part of this, but the first of the films was 7 Men from Now, which was made for John Wayne's company. Wayne was supposed to play the lead in that, but then Randolph Scott started it instead. So it was made for a different studio, and then the other one I think is Westbound. Westbound is not included in this set. So I wasn't going to talk about these films until further down the line, but this packaging was so great. I really, excuse me a second. I really enjoyed I really liked the packaging here. Kept calling out, watch these next. They were also. The appeal too was also that these are in 4K UHD Dolby Vision. So I haven't seen these movies in like forever, and when I saw them, they were all on television. I never saw any of these films in a film society or repertory theater. So I never really saw them the way they were intended to be. Let me just say that at least the tall T looks absolutely astonishing, fantastic. It's a triple wow. The landscapes, the western landscapes just look magnificent, the detail. So the tall T, the first one in the set, is from 1957. And it's one of the Renowned Westerns that was written, the screenplay was written by Burt Kennedy. And from a story, The Captive, by Elmore Leonard, who wrote westerns then. Later on, he would write crime stories, and he would, write the novels, the movies made from his novels, Get Shorty, Jackie Brown. And it's, here's the star, Randolph Scott, and here is the villain for the tall T, and this is played by Richard Boone. And it's a very elemental story, very familiar story if you've seen a lot of westerns like I have. Scott is on a stagecoach with 2 other people, newlyweds, and they're taken hostage at a stage depot. When they arrive, the outlaws have taken over the depot. They think this is the regular stage which they're planning to rob, but this is not the regular stage. This was a stagecoach hired by these newlyweds, and the regular stage is an hour down the road. So we learned that these are murderous people, and the newlywed husband quickly sizes up the situation and tells the outlaws, my wife is the daughter of the richest mining owner in the area. He's very wealthy. He'll pay a big ransom. He's trying to save his life. So they decide to go for that. So originally we have this hostage taking, and then we have a ransom story. So the 1950s, you ever saw the 1950 movie Rawhide? It's basically the same situation as Rawhide, and even Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight is a similar situation. But this is filmed in Technicolor, and it's filmed in Lone Pine, California, where hundreds of westerns were filmed. And you can understand it. It's just fantastic scenery. The rock formations, some of them, they're like circular rocks piled on each other like marbles. And it has all different, it can be desert, it can have great vistas of the Sierras. And so the film looks fantastic in UHD. I mean, it's just gorgeous. Now, Scott being taken captive here, he is not a Western hero who is like the fastest gun in the West. He is not Superman. He's got to live by his wits. He's got to figure out a way out of this to save his life and particularly to save the newlywed bride. But the movie begins as a very amiable comedy, and Scott is sort of a happy-go-lucky guy. He's been a ramrod for many years. He's well respected, but his dream was to have his own place. So he has a small ranch, and that's good enough for him. People like him. There is a shot. There's a sequence in the town, but basically everything else is out. Exteriors out in Lone Pine. So, but this amiable comedy becomes very dark. Almost, it turns on a dime, and the film is I guess you would call it lean and mean. It's less than 80 minutes. There's no extraneous. There's no fat on the bone here, and it's amazing how filmmakers could get so much into 80 minutes. You know, as far as the storyline, and also very interesting and vividly drawn characters in a kind of morality play, a morality tale. Now, Bud Bedecker had been a bullfighter. He actually was a professional bullfighter in Mexico. He trained for many years when he was very young, went to Mexico. When he came back, he got involved in the movies. He made a score of movies that nobody will ever remember. It was just sort of his training ground, Boston Blackie movies. And but then he made a film, I think it's The Bullfighter and the Lady, with Robert Stack, which is basically the story of his early life. And then he got involved with westerns, and he sort of takes the arena of the bullfight into his narratives, into the visual design of the film, which you really see in the Tall T, because probably 2/3 of the movie is set in this hideout where the characters are kind of in a circular formation, and Bedecker is so good at getting at very dramatic blocking of where he places the characters, and it basically will come down in the end to the good guy fighting the matador, fighting the bull, Scott fighting Richard Boone. Now, Boone's villain, and evidently all the villains, and I'm not as familiar with these westerns as I am with many other westerns of this era, but he's I wouldn't call him sympathetic, but he is interesting. Because Boone, he's with these two cohorts. He's the chief outlaw. His two minions are just, you know, he doesn't like them. He even tells Scott, I don't like these guys. His life that he would have liked to have led is the life that Randolph Scott is living. So we have this strange sort of connection between the two men here, even though they know this is the bull and this is the matador when you know, push comes to shove as far as the narrative goes. And Richard Boone was just a terrific actor. He could play villains, he could play good guys. I remember him from television days when he played on Have Gun Will Travel, played Paladin, a knight without honor without armor in a savage land, a knight without armor in a savage land. That was the lead into Gunsmoke. This was Gunsmoke was the #1 television show for probably 20 years. So, and there's, in all these 5 films, there are other character actors, including Richard Boone being one of them, that really do, you know, evoke. You see them sort of in their beginning days, and the actor you see in the beginning days here playing the real murderess of his Richard Boone's minions was played by Henry Silva. He's just pure evil, and he could play pure evil by as good as anybody could. And I was surprised, I didn't know this, but he actually came out of the actor's studio in New York. So he was a very you know, a student of acting. Trained in the method, and you could see some of that. I didn't know that, but then when I was watching his performance, you know, you could see some of these influences of the method. He's really good. Now, the newlywed wife is a spinster. She had been a spinster, so she's marrying this. She married this accountant as sort of her last chance. She is indeed wealthy. She is a wealthy daughter, the daughter of a very wealthy father. Played by Maureen O'Sullivan, and so she was a big name. You know, I mean, she was. She never achieved, like, you know, ultimate stardom. She's always going to be remembered for playing Jane to Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. Very good actress here, and her scenes with Randolph Scott are quite good. In fact, there's a couple of very strange love scenes in this film that are really kind of startling. Now, Randolph Scott, his career is truly interesting, and there is the only new supplement here. There's a bunch of supplements included in this set, but the only new one is about a 30-minute piece on Randolph Scott's career by Farron Smith Namey. It's really good. And Scott in the 1930s played all kinds of different roles, and including westerns. And then after World War II, he decided to devote himself entirely just about to westerns. And I didn't realize this, but in the early 1950s, Scott was one of the top box office stars. His films really did well. He was very popular with audiences. That was in its decline. Scott was pushing 60 in these Ranown westerns. He doesn't look it. He looks fantastic. That chiseled face and that western drawl, and he looks so good on horseback. I mean, he looks authentic, and he was, in fact, a very good he had very good horsemanship in his private life as well. So by the time they come to these series of films, and again, Seven Ben for Now was intended for the previous film that isn't in the set was intended for John Wayne. So Scott got involved with it instead, and Bedecker and Scott got along great, as well as the producer. So they just kept pulling them out because although these were B-Westerns, very short movies, B-Westerns were generally pretty short, they were very popular. They got good reviews. We have a commentary by Janine Bassinger, which is from about 2008. She's very scene specific. She really loves these Bedecker movies, and she contributes, I think, one more commentary on one of the other films. And we get a introduction by Martin Scorsese. Now, the introduction's on the Blu-ray, so if you want to see the introduction, you have to put the Blu-ray in to watch the introduction. If you're going to watch it in 4K, you have to put that one back in. I actually watched the Scorsese introduction, which was from probably around 2004, maybe for a DVD release. I'm kind of surprised that Scorsese is such an admirer of Bedecker. One of the other, I haven't watched all the supplements yet, but one of the other ones that I really wanted to see was a late in life interview with Bedecker on his ranch in Southern California. He was far off from Hollywood and living a very happy life. He was still writing screenplays. He's a real name dropper. Everybody is a friend. He evidently very much valued friendship. And he mentions Martin Scorsese as a very dear friend. But along with this interview, as do people like Raoul Walsh and many of the other kind of roughneck directors of westerns and action films from the classic Hollywood days, they couldn't stand modern movies, the ultra violence that in the 70s and 80s, and this interview is in the 90s. And he rails against, ultra violence and sex scenes. And I was wondering with the Scorsese connection, had he ever actually seen a Scorsese movie? Because he seemed to be describing exactly the kind of movie Scorsese made. Now, memoir alert, which I always start with when I was a kid, and watched so many westerns. And for me, the big star, and for most boys my age in the 50s, early 60s, John Wayne was the ultimate. He was the ultimate. The Searchers, Rio Bravo was just such a huge hit with kids my age. And I didn't know who John Ford was. I didn't know who Howard Hawks was. I didn't know what a director did, but I knew what John Wayne did, and he was certainly a big screen hero for me in those days, not so much today. And then the other westerns that I really loved were the Jimmy Stewart westerns. And this came a bit later, and I began to notice that the ones I liked the best always had Anthony Mann's name on them. So you had this great collaboration between Stewart and Anthony Mann during the times. And then all the television shows and all the other, very generic westerns, I watched them all. And I got to admit that Randolph Scott never struck me as particularly interesting when I was a kid. He was sort of, compared to Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne, he seemed a little bit dull. But I liked him, he certainly looked like a Western star. And the storylines didn't seem all that much different than the storylines you would find on, the series, all the many television series. How many Western stories can there be? There's not that many. They're constantly repeatable. And I never, even when in the late '60s, because Bud Boetticher was one of the Hollywood genre directors who were championed by the auteur critics in the late '60s, who really brought in the early days of film studies. And Jim Kitsis wrote a famous book that included his very positive evaluations of Boetticher. But even then, I never really got it. So, for me, this set is going to be a rediscovery. Now, as far as the Tall T goes, man, this is a good movie. I really liked it, and I think I'm going to appreciate some of the other films in this set much more than I did, 40, 50 years ago, even longer than that, 60 years ago. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with the last four. There's two more UHD discs which have 2 films each on it. I might do a video for each disc, or if I really like the next couple movies, I'm probably going to be tempted to do another, single movie video. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.